Hello and welcome back to Bonkers Economics. Am I bonkers or is it the system we live in? You decide. Today we're asking, why is it that house prices are so high in Britain? It's a really important issue because housing, as we all know, is highly unaffordable in the UK. Rents are astronomical, house prices going up all the time in many parts of the country. More and more people struggling to get onto the housing ladder, so-called. But also, and really importantly, high house prices prevent us from spending money on things that we could really benefit from in our lives, because so much money is going into housing, whether rents or mortgages, that we don't do a lot of things that we could if house prices were lower. So that's the question. What's the answer? Well, it's not quite what you think. It's not supply and demand in the conventional sense. It's not that there isn't enough land on which to build houses. It's a much more complex mixture of why land is so difficult to get hold of and why money is so easy to get hold of. And why the combination of those two things, easy money and inaccessible land, has created this crazy perfect storm of circumstances in which house prices got out of control. So, first of all, land. How much is an acre of land worth? Well, an acre of decent farmland is currently worth of the order of £10,000. That's the sort of price. I live down in the southwest, and that's the sort of price that you'll get for an acre of decent land, particularly if it's in a reasonably large parcel. Now, on an acre of land, you can build 15 houses, roughly speaking, at the sort of density that the government recommends. So that's £600 per house. £600 per house is the, if you like, the opportunity cost of land. Land valued at what else you could do with it. Grow something, graze cattle, whatever it might be. And to build a house, well, again, I know a little bit about building houses. They can be very expensive. They can be very cheap. The sort of typical 3-bedroom house on a housing estate, maybe £100,000, £110,000, £120,000 tops, depending on where it is. Plus, of course, money for the infrastructure, the roads, that sort of thing. So those are the sort of prices we're talking about. It's not terribly expensive, fundamentally, to build a house. You could do it comfortably for £150,000 all in. But what makes housing so expensive is the value of the land. Why is the land so much more for housing than for farming or for anything else? Well, most people would say, well, it's down to the planning system. Now, the planning system is interesting. It's brought in to prevent bad housing being built, if you like. It's rather strange because it only came in 1946 or 7, I believe. And before that, you could build a house where you liked, pretty much. There were rules about how you built your house. There were rules going back to the Great Fire of London about how you built houses to prevent them burning down and that sort of thing. But there were very few rules about where you could build a house or what you could build. And yet, ironically, all the houses that we now protect, all the listed buildings, all the beautiful houses that we like, all built without planning permission. And yet, since planning permission was created as a thing in the 1940s, all the post-war housing, an awful lot of it we don't like. An awful lot of it we think is rather poor quality, high-rise buildings that were built and then were pulled down. So ironically, planning permission has not been about improving the quality of the built environment or the quality of the housing that we're building. Planning permission has been about managing expectations of where we can build. And that's something which has played directly into the hands of a small number of housing developers. Because believe it or not, there is actually no shortage of plots with planning permission. By good estimates, there are about 1 million plots at the moment which have got planning permission to build a house, and those houses are not being built. And those plots are owned mostly by big housing developers. And why aren't they building houses on them? Well, because if they did, in those sorts of quantities, the prices of houses would come down. There'd be plenty of houses on the market. There'd be no real additional value attached to the underlying land. We might even get back to that £600 a plot sort of figure because there'd be plenty of land. There'd be no shortage. If we built 1 million houses tomorrow, there'd be no shortage of houses. There'd be too many, in fact. We'd have a surplus. We'd have a situation where houses were going cheap for that reason. So developers are sitting on unbuilt plots to maintain the underlying value of the land. And why are they doing that? Well, they're doing that to make profits, of course. They make more money out of land, buying it and selling it, than they do out of building houses. In fact, for a developer, building a house is a rather boring, annoying cost to their business. What the developer wants to do, buy a piece of land for, I don't know, £1 million, divvy it up into a load of plots, build houses and sell them on for £2 million, plus the cost of building the house. So the cost of building the house can be kept as low as possible, then the profit on the land will be as high as possible. So why does the government allow developers to get away with this? Why does it in fact actively encourage them to behave in this way? Well, the short answer is that the government thinks that house prices are popular. It thinks people like high house prices, either because they own homes and they want prices to rise, or they want to buy a home and they think they're buying into something which will be a rising market. So house prices are thought to be popular politically, in addition to which high rents and high house prices actually increase GDP. They increase the size of the economy. So if we're measuring the economy in terms of money value, then high house prices and high rents actually make us feel richer. Now that's completely bonkers, and there's a whole bonkers economics video about this which will explain why. And I urge you to look at that. It's all in colour with graphs and photographs and all sorts of things that I don't normally do to make the point as forcefully as possible. But here we're just asking ourselves, given that governments think high house prices are a good thing and they are keen to encourage high house prices, how has that changed their behaviour over the last 20, 30, 40 years? Well, 30, 40 years ago we had the big council house sell-off, where the government took all the housing stock it had built in the previous 40, 50 years and it sold it off at rock bottom prices to the people who lived in them. So that social housing has all gone. But it's important to remember that before the 1980s, the government put huge amounts of money into the housing market by building houses. And before 1950-something, they could do this by buying land at agricultural prices. So they were able to build houses which had no real massive land value attached to them, and they could be rented out affordably, and a lot of people had houses to live in that didn't cost them an arm and a leg. So that's how it was. And then come the 1980s, it made much more money available to banks to lend for housing by liberalising the mortgage market, making more money available and encouraging more and more lending to people who wanted to buy houses. So there's more money chasing the number of houses that there were. And it put significant, really significant sums over the years into housing benefit. Now, housing benefit is a massive subsidy to landlords, fundamentally. It appears to be a benefit to people who can't afford to pay their rent. And of course, in one sense it is, because it allows people to have homes that they couldn't otherwise have. But the money is actually going straight to landlords. And if prices were lower and rents were lower, the government wouldn't have to spend half as much money. So the government is effectively underpinning rents, pushing prices up by being willing to pay these substantial housing benefit amounts to landlords of people who can't afford to pay a full market rent. Now that figure has been running in the order of £20 billion a year, which is a staggering sum of money when you consider that with that £20 billion, it didn't have to pay for building land. It could probably build 150,000, 200,000 houses every year. So in 3 or 4 years, the entire housing crisis would be gone if the government simply spent the money it's spending on housing benefit on building houses. But the second thing the government has done is it's put more and more money into the housing market through lower interest rates. Now, the government ultimately controls interest rates, as we know, through the Bank of England, and they've had incredibly low interest rates for a very long time. And you'd think, well, that's good. That makes housing cheaper, makes money cheaper to borrow, cheaper to buy a house. But not at all. Because if we go back to the beginning of this conversation where the landowner developers were controlling the flow of houses onto the market, well, as more and more money became available to buy those houses, they were able to push prices up. So the more money that came onto the market to buy houses, the higher prices went, because people could afford more. People could just about afford more. So developers have managed to find a way of keeping house prices just at the top of what people can afford. And that's how it works. You keep the prices just at the affordable level, government making more and more money available for people to buy houses, people taking out bigger and bigger loans at low interest rates, and developers are taking away these huge profits. In addition to which, the government actually has additional funds available to subsidise people's loans. There have been various help to buy schemes in the last 4 or 5 years, and we've seen how developers' profits have rocketed as a consequence of that money being poured into the market and being made available to push house prices up. So there you have it in a nutshell. You've got a shortage of land because developers are sitting on it and not developing it, because their model requires them not to develop more than they can sell at maximum price. And you've got vast amounts of money available to housing through bank loans, through government subsidies, through housing benefit, all that sort of thing going into the housing market, pushing up rents, pushing up house prices, making people feel they can afford more and more. Now that's not good for anybody, because as we said at the beginning, the major problem with high house prices is that they absorb money that you could so much more usefully use for other things. If your mortgage was half what it was, if your rent was half what it was, think of the holidays you could take, or the other food you could buy, or the things you could do which would create real value in your life. And that's what we're missing out on through high house prices. Leave apart the fact that we're making life more and more expensive for the next generation. So there we are, why house prices are so expensive, this perfect storm of too much money, too much cheap money, and developers totally in control of what we pay to buy houses. It could be fixed. The government would simply have to rein in the developers, get them building on those empty plots, and in particular, make sure that more plots are available for building at affordable rates. So more plots available where people don't have to pay a full market rent because the land is tied in to a low value going forward. There are all sorts of other things about that we can talk about, and we will do in a further video from Bonkers Economics. But for the moment, thanks for watching. Do subscribe to the channel, and I look forward to talking again soon.